democracy in talk radio. Of, for, and by you, the people.
Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Hi, I'm Brad Bannon, the host of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon, because they couldn't find anybody else named Brad Bannon to do the show. I'm a national Democratic and progressive strategist, a columnist for The Hill in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst for News Radio KNX in Los Angeles. Watch Deadline DC for the latest and greatest in progressive news and talk. If you're listening to us on the Leslie Marshall Radio Network, you can also watch us at facebook.com/Brad Bannon, facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, and on YouTube at youtube.com/Brad Bannon. Every Monday, I talk to prominent people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward, or at least trying to keep it from going backwards. This Monday, today on Deadline DC, I have two great guests. Mica Soellner, who is a congressional reporter, or the congressional reporter for Punchbowl News, returns to Deadline CC to talk about the new Republican House of Representatives. Then in the second half hour, our good friend Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA, comes on the show to discuss President Biden's pardon of Hunter Biden and some other matters. And as usual, we have the my intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi, on the boards to keep the show running on time and to make sure it keeps online. Before we go to our first guest, we're going to play this clip with an update on control of the next United States House of Representatives.
The results of three races for the House of Representatives are finally being called 3 weeks after Election Day. 2 races in California and 1 race in Iowa were separated by a maximum of 800 votes. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis expressed frustration at the slow count and ballot dumps that have favored Democrats. Representative Michelle Steele conceded defeat in her re-election bid for California's 45th congressional district. It's a key win for Democrats in one of the most competitive races of the 2024 cycle. Steele seemed to acknowledge her loss in a statement prior to the Associated Press calling the state. Steele trailed Democratic challenger Derek Tran by just 613 votes. Representative Mariannette Miller Meeks survived a challenge to her seat in Iowa's 1st congressional district. Miller Meeks defeated Democrat Christina Bohannon by just 0.2 percentage points. The win is important for Republicans as Mike Johnson looks to know how difficult it will be to wrangle his conference. Only one race remains to be called, California's 13th congressional district. Republican Representative John Duarte is currently trailing Democratic challenger Adam Gray. If Duarte retains office, Republicans will have a 220 to 215 majority. The results come as Republicans are expected to have 3 vacancies in the new year after Matt Gaetz, Elise Stefanik, and Mike Waltz step down.
Okay, we're back. Our guest in this half hour is Mica Soellner, congressional reporter for Punchbowl News. Mica, let's start out with a simple lay of the land. They're still counting votes in California. They may be in other places. What is the partisan composition of the next House of Representatives look like?
Yeah. Hi, Brad. Thanks for having me. So the next Congress is going to look very similarly to the numbers and margins that we saw in this current Congress, with Republicans holding a very slim margin. We'll see how that shakes up for Speaker Mike Johnson, who struggled with having such a narrow majority in the House, where that gives more power to maybe the more conservative wing of the party, which is going to have a lot more say with Trump in charge as well, and Republicans holding the Senate. So we'll see a very similar number wise, but we'll see how this shakes up with a new White House.
Okay, now complicate matters for Speaker Johnson. There are going to be three House vacancies with members who have received nominations from Donald Trump to be part of his administration. When are those vacancies likely to be filled, and how difficult is it for the speaker to keep his majority when he has such a thin margin to work with?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to differ for both Florida and New York, but there's been a timeline set up by Governor DeSantis already in Florida for the Waltz and Gates seats at least, and so that should be those should be starting in the spring. But it's going to be challenging, I can presume, just given the differences that Johnson has had in the past, and I think this next month is going to be a test of his speakership as well, with the another funding fight happening with this government funding deadline coming up. And but the thing about the three that are leaving to work in the administration is that they will stay to at least vote him in as speaker. And he did win it unanimously behind closed doors a couple weeks ago.
Now, given the thin margin of error he has in the House, is there anything, and he has, of course, now he has a president to work with, is what can Speaker Johnson do differently to avoid all the chaos that occurred last year and this year?
Yeah, I think the more of the majority makers, the moderate middle, if you want to put it, of the Republican conference, whether people agree that there are these more pragmatic, vulnerable Republicans that did win re-election that probably want a bigger say in the conference, especially kind of given the sway that members of the House Freedom Caucus and the conservative faction of the conference has had this last Congress. So I think that him being able to kind of give in to individual members and navigate his relationship with Trump is really going to help him. And so far, we've seen that Trump has been very supportive of Mike Johnson, even when he's put out statements that kind of go above the speaker.
Okay, our guest in this half hour is Mica Soellner, Congressional Reporter for Punchbowl News. Now, the speaker has a few moderate members to contend with, but aren't the diehard Trump Republican members going to be even more want to be even more ambitious now that they have a Republican president to work with? And how can the speaker reconcile those demands from the right with the needs of his moderate members to get reelected in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the balance that he has tried to have this whole Congress, which has been challenging at times. But I think that you're right that there's going to be a faction of the Republican conference that's going to have a bigger voice in their conference than they already do. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how Trump navigates his relationships on the Hill. Obviously, he has a lot of close allies, and every single member, I would say, is going to try and sustain and improve and strengthen their relationship with the president.
Has the president-elect appointed a House liaison yet?
That I'm not sure, but I mean, I can speak to some of the allies that he does have on the Hill. I mean, he has several. I mean, this is why I think that Trump has pulled so many from House Republicans as well.
So, okay, well, it'll be interesting to see how that relationship progresses. A quick question, because we only have a minute. There's a deadline for funding the federal government, which is, I believe, December 15th. Are they just going to kick that can down the road and go to some sort of continuing resolution until the new Congress and a new president are in office?
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. I haven't heard too much of including what's actually going to be in this text related to a potential continuing resolution, but I know that there are some members that do want to get some things attached. So we might see a funding fight happen here, as usual, but it's most likely going to be perhaps a year-long CR.
Okay, we're going to go to a break now for our radio listeners. And a reminder to radio listeners that if they want to watch the show, they can, as well as listen to it, they can watch it at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, or on twitter.com/Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Mica Soellner from Punchbowl News. When we get back, we're going to talk about some fights for committee positions in the House and also changes in Democratic messaging. We'll be right back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon, and hopefully your attention when we get back from this break.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize?
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm Brad Bannon, and my guest in this half hour is Mica Soellner, who is congressional correspondent for Punchbowl News and a friend of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon, I hope. Anyway, let's talk. There's at least one big fight on the Democratic House aisle for the chair to be the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. Could you talk about that, Mica?
Yeah, so we're seeing these House Democratic fights across the board. We just saw Congressman Jamie Raskin announce that he's going to be challenging Jerry Nadler for the top Democratic spot on the House Judiciary Committee. This is going to be really interesting because Raskin is currently the ranking member of the Oversight Committee. So that's going to open up another battle over there in terms of who wants to be the top Democrat. And this also falls in line with a similar effort in the Natural Resources Committee, where we saw Chairman Raul Gruelva actually step down. But before that, he was being challenged by Jared Huffman, another junior member. And same thing, I will add once more, is happening in the Agriculture Committee as well, with David Scott, a very senior member of the committee, facing two challenges as well.
Okay. Do you have any sense how these junior Democrats are going to fare in their fights to be a ranking member of their committee?
I think it's possible that they could get a lot of support. I think that the Democratic Party, especially as it continues to invite and recruit and welcome in younger members, more diverse members, and members from different backgrounds, that there's been a big push for this idea of generational change in the party. And we saw this in their leadership elections as well, which in one of their messaging posts run by Debbie Dingell, a very, very senior member with a very established last name in Congress, was challenged actually by a freshman, Jasmine Crockett of Texas, a rising star, you can say, in the Democratic Party, for a very senior level position. So this is something that I think younger Democrats are very eager for.
Are all the Republican committee chairs settled, or is there are some that are still up for grabs?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be seeing a lot of changes here in the Republican side too. It's going to depend on how members make their case with the steering committee next week, and we're going to see a fight for the Foreign Affairs Committee, which has about 4 different members running, as well as the Education and Workforce Committee. So there's definitely a few committees that will have new Republican chairs as well.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you this question in this segment. There's been some conversation about it. What role will former Speaker Nancy Pelosi have within the Democratic caucus? She seems to be very visible. What is her relationship with Hakeem Jeffries?
Yeah, I mean, Pelosi, I think, has guided Jeffries a lot and navigated the way that he has led the caucus, kind of taking, her lead. She's still very much a power player in the party. I think that's been proven this entire election cycle, honestly, with how the way that she has kind of been vocal around Joe Biden's viability and Kamala Harris and her speaking out on what the party needs to do. I think that she's a very strong voice in the party that remains. And well, she's always going to be kind of in the shadows and leading the way, I think, especially as this newer generation of leadership takes the reins.
Okay. And we've got to go to another break here. But we'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon after this very brief break. Welcome back to our radio listeners. Brad Bannon. And I want to remind our radio listeners again that if you'd like to watch the show, as well as listen to it, you can watch it on Facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos. You can watch it on Twitter at Twitter.com/Brad Bannon, or on YouTube at YouTube.com/@Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Mica Soellner, who is congressional reporter for Punchbowl News. We've been talking about some of the changes that will occur in the House of Representatives. Now I want to move on to the future. Mica, what are Democrats saying about Kamala Harris's defeat and the need for a new Democratic message?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of tension right now that remains in the Democratic Party following the election, and they're very much finding their footing in terms of what they need to do to reach some of these voters that they lost. I think we're seeing a lot from members who come from different backgrounds, these labor Democrats, as they want to be called, talking about the need to really address and appeal better to working class voters, and that means maybe changing their language or using a different, different kinds of messaging when it comes to appealing and talking about the economy and the workforce and these issues that have kind of fallen to the wayside.
And is there any hope? I think you could make some serious arguments against the Harris message. I supported the vice president, but I think there were problems with the way she addressed the American public. For one thing is the very simple matter that she did not address very effectively the main concern of voters, which was the higher prices and the economy. And, it's a tricky matter because the reality is, even though Joe Biden created 15 or 16 million new jobs during his presidency, prices rose higher than wages. And I don't think the vice president effectively addressed that issue during the campaign. Do House Democrats have any ideas how to, talk about economic issues so that it has an impact on voters?
I think they're really strongly figuring that out right now. I know that they are trying to make that their top message. As you would notice, we've seen some of the most vocal Trump critics even tone down their rhetoric. Hakeem Jeffries, for example, would always use terms like MAGA extremism, and he didn't use that once in his first press conference after the election. So I think that strikes a tone in terms of how they're trying to talk to Americans, especially after Trump not only won the Electoral College, but also the popular vote. So they're trying to navigate this very intrinsic problem that the party is having right now, and when it comes to messaging and appealing to these working class voters that swifted heavily for Trump.
Do you think it was more, or do they think it was more message, substance, or language, or a combination of both?
I think a lot of it was language, is what members are saying. I know this is something that ranges from moderate members like Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who has complained that Democrats have appealed too much to college-educated voters and not people in the trades, and they don't know how to speak to people that work in blue-collar jobs. And then even someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most progressive members in the House, is saying the same thing. I mean, obviously, we all know her background. She came as a waitress. which I talked to her a little bit about that. And she said that there is an era in DC that looks down on that kind of work. And there is a problem in her party. She acknowledged that they don't know how to speak to that. So I think language is going to be a big factor here.
Okay. Well, let me, since you brought up the subject, I was going to ask this, but I will anyway. There's some talk, I've seen some talk that that AOC is considering a race for president in 2028. Do you see that?
She would be a very young contender. Obviously, AOC has a huge platform and a following. But I think that she could have ambitions to move up in the House. I think there's a lot of pathways for her. I have not heard her name floated yet in terms of presidential, at least seriously by her peers. But you never know. I mean, she's obviously going to be a big name and power player in the party for a long time, and I think she's one of these few members in the House that has this national brand, and she's somewhat of more of like a celebrity status than a public official.
Okay, I can think of like a dozen Democratic governors who are thinking of running for president in 2028. We don't have time left in the segment to list them all, but you can guess the possibilities. Are there any Democratic House members besides AOC who might be presidential candidates?
I'd have to think about that one. I haven't heard any names floated right now, but I think you're right in terms of the governors, maybe some senators. But yeah, Democrats are trying to find their next stars as well. Obviously, we've seen reports that Harris isn't, she's not trying to stay out of politics, but I don't know how many people would want her to run again.
Okay, my final question, I think, is the big news of the day is President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter. What's been the reaction among both Democrats and Republicans to the pardon so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw the obvious reactions from Republicans. This kind of plays into their claims that there's a two-tier justice system, or that's overly politicized. So a lot of them have been saying that. But what's interesting is seeing the Democratic pushback on Biden's decision to pardon his son. We've seen this from everybody from Governor Jared Polis in Colorado, Jason Crow, a representative from Colorado, Greg Landsman, a representative of Ohio, and several other members. As well as Gary Peters, who actually ran the Senate campaign arm, saying that this was not a good decision by Biden and that it's not a part of Democratic norms. So there's been a lot of pushback from the president here.
Well, while we're on the subject of pardons, I suspect, I don't know this to be true, but I'm just looking ahead a little bit. Will most Republicans be comfortable if the President Trump pardons the leaders and many of the participants in the Capitol riot that occurred on January 6, 2021?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think there's going to be a lot of Republicans, whether they say so publicly, but who'll be privately very uncomfortable with that move. And I think many, especially some of these in more purple districts, are not going to be afraid to express their dismay on that. I mean, we already saw many members that have obviously been pretty vocal about the Capitol riot on January 6th. But I'll also keep in mind that the two members that voted to impeach Trump over that are still in office.
Okay, Mica, thank you very much for joining us today on Deadline DC. I'm sure we'll have you back early next year to talk about the going on in the House. Stay tuned. Our guest in the second half hour is Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA, and we are going to talk about the president's pardon of his son, Hunter, and the media coverage of the 2024 presidential campaign. We'll be right back after this message.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Let's talk turkey. No, not the butterballs in Congress. I'm talking about the real thing, the big gobbler, 46 million of which we Americans will devour this Thanksgiving. It was the Aztecs who first domesticated this gallo pavo, but the invading Spanish conquerors fouled up the bird's origins. They declared it to be related to the peacock. Wrong. They also thought it originated in Turkey. Wrong. And they thought Turkey was located in Africa. Well, you can see the Spanish were pretty confused. Actually, even the origin of our Thanksgiving Day is confused. The popular assumption is that it was first celebrated by the Mayflower immigrants and the Wampanoag natives at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1621. They feasted on venison, fur keys, Wampanoag for gobblers, eels, mussels, corn, and beer. But wait, say Virginians, the first Thanksgiving Foodapalooza was not in Massachusetts. The feast originated down here in Jamestown Colony back in 1608. Whoa there, Pilgrims. Folks in El Paso, Texas say it all began way out there in 1598 when Spanish settlers sat down with people of the Piro and Manso tribes to give thanks, feasting on roasted duck, geese, and fish. Ha, says a Florida group, asserting that the very first Thanksgiving happened in 1565 when the Spanish settlers of St. Augustine, Florida, and friends from the Timuacan tribe chowed down on cocido, a stew of salt pork, garbanzo beans, and garlic, washing it all down with red wine. This is Jim Hightower saying, wherever it began and whatever the purists claim is official, Thanksgiving Day is as multicultural as America. So let's just enjoy. Kick back, give thanks we're in a country with such ethnic richness, and dive into your turkey rellenos, mushu turkey, turkey falafel, barbecue turkey, and so on.
About Steve Bannon because we're not related cousins or even, whatever. So anyway, we're going to talk in this half hour with our good friend of the show. We are, Sarah Jones is, as you probably know by now, she's been on enough, is editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. She joined us frequently to add a much-needed perspective to my feeble mutterings. And before we get to Sarah, though, we're going to play this clip. And this clip is a clip of former Watergate prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks talking about President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter.
Okay, Jill, let me start with you. Your initial reactions, or your reaction to President Biden pardoning his son.
I am relieved and thrilled that he did it. I think this was one of those cases that called out for clemency. Hunter Biden, first of all, would not have ever been prosecuted for the gun crime, but for his last name. Second of all, he was addicted, and that was a cause of his actions. He has now been sober for many years, and this is a time when it is really appropriate for a grant of clemency.
Okay, and that was Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate prosecutor, and our guest again is Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Sarah, welcome back to Deadline DC. And what's your opinion of the president's pardon of his son, Hunter Biden?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And
it's always a pleasure to have you.
It's always great to be on your show. You guys, you really know what you're talking about. And at times like this, that is so important. So I just want to reinforce that for everybody listening and watching. In terms of this pardon, to me, the kind of backlash that's coming from some quarters, some pundits, and even some Democrats is really disgusting because, you know, it was very clear that this was a selective and political prosecution. And even when all of that was going on, Joe Biden was hands off. Like, I'm going to show the separation of the White House and the DOJ, and I'm not going to get involved. And I really respected that about what he, you know, I thought it was unfair to his son, but I understood what he was trying to do. What has happened? Well, Donald Trump won the election, and he's talking about putting very unstable people in charge of the FBI. And, you know, Joe Biden doesn't want his son to be at the victim of Kash Patel's feelings. You know, this man is very irrational. And Hunter Biden was kind of what they ran on. He was a big, you know, they made such a big deal about his private parts and kind of trying to humiliate him, I think, into getting his dad to, you know, not run for office. So to me, I just think that what we are seeing in terms of the backlash to this and the kind of people criticizing it is this grotesque double standard, and really nothing evinces how we got to where we are right now post this election better than some of the reactions we've been seeing to Joe Biden doing what, you know, Donald Trump did for his daughter's father-in-law, and for Steve Bannon. You know, he issued pardons for both of them, let one of them be an ambassador. You know, that is not what Joe Biden did here at all. And I just think when people conflate this, it's just getting so outrageous.
Okay.
And
well, you know, I almost always agree with you, Sarah. But in this case, I'm going to disagree.
Oh, okay, let's do it. Yeah.
As a father, I can certainly understand Joe Biden's desire to pardon his son, especially with the Trump administration taking over in January, and God knows what they do to Hunter while he's in prison. I don't even want to think about it. But this sends a really bad message from Democrats. Voters are very unhappy. 3 out of 4 voters said in the exit polls they thought the country was headed in the wrong direction. And I think many of these voters believe there's a double standard in this nation, where the high and mighty get off, where ordinary people get prosecuted and convicted for crimes that the high and mighty don't. I also think that, and you brought up the president, Jared Kushner's father, who's going to be our ambassador to France after he was convicted of all sorts of federal crimes, one of them eliciting a prostitute to go after a business rival or something. But, you know, where is our moral high ground for criticizing the Kushners of the world when, Joe Biden lets his own son off? And, I mean, the other thing, and I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop here. I think one of the first things Trump is going to do is he's going to pardon some, maybe all, of the Capitol rioters from January 6, 2001. And how are we going to criticize that massive malfeasance of justice when, we supported our president pardoning his own son? I just think it's really bad politics and reinforces an image that people have of the Democratic Party that is going to cause us real political problems.
So I hear everything you're saying, and you make really good points. I'm not sure what the right answer is to this, but one thing I know that is the problem. This really kind of encapsulates the entire problem that Democrats have in this environment, this media environment, in which is the only way that voters get informed about things. So we are in this position where Democrats are held to this standard way up here and can never deviate from it. And we, I think, as liberals, as progressives, are always pushing them like, you better uphold these standards. You know what I mean? You better not be racist. You better not be sexist. Like, and I agree with all of those things. And you better support labor, and you better do this, and you better do that. But then I look at, like, how is this translating? How is it being weaponized against Democrats to have standards? I'm not suggesting they shouldn't have standards. That would be, a sick thing to say. But I'm very concerned, I guess, about it doesn't seem to matter what Democrats do. Like, no matter how well they play the game or how much, look at Joe Biden was pushed out of the election when he was doing everything the right way. And I just don't know if the entire battle zone is in a place that we don't understand. Like, we're not playing for the image is already lost because the image is being crafted by the media, and the media is all owned by right-wing billionaires. So how are Democrats ever going to get a good message across? But I totally agree with your point that people see the justice system and the entire system in the United States as being very unfair and only benefiting the elites. And I think the Democrats do suffer from that. And part of that was when they let their donors, elite donors, push Biden out, and who the voters had chosen, like whether or not he was going to lose the entire election for them or not. That was a very strange moment for the party, and I think a reckoning is called for sure.
Let me ask you the question. Let's say Trump does support all or some of the Capitol rioters from the infamous January 6th day. And of course, I'm sure he's going to say something. Well, if Joe Biden can pardon his son, I can pardon these clowns. How do you respond to that?
I think Democrats are going to need to come back and start being a little bit like Republicans. They always come up with a message. Look at Mitch McConnell. He never answers the question. He always responds with the agenda that he has. So as a Democrat, we're talking about people who tried to overthrow the United States government. That's not the same thing as somebody who is a drug addict and it, or I think it could even be better than that when you don't even bring that up. Just, we're talking about people. Why don't you love America? How about that? Why don't you love America? Why do you support people who are trying to take down the United States of America?
I'm going to have to interrupt you. We have to take a break now to give our radio listeners a little vacation. We'll be back with more of Sarah Jones, the editor-in-chief of Politicus USA, right after this message with more stimulating conversation, I hope. Okay. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest is a good friend of the show, Sarah Jones, the editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Sarah, you have a unique perspective on campaigns and elections because you live and work in a battleground state, Pennsylvania. So I'm going to ask you this question. There's been a lot of conversation, which I've contributed to, about what Democrats have to do differently to do better in elections. And ground zero for the Democratic failure this time was the Keystone State. Vice President Harris lost Pennsylvania to Donald Trump. And also, importantly, we lost a U.S. senator, a great, really great United States senator who I liked a lot, Bob Casey Jr., to a Republican challenger. And the Republicans now have a 53-47 margin in the Senate for the president, the new president or president-elect or whoever he is, to work with. So let me ask you a question. What went wrong in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think it was a number of things, but when you step back and kind of look at it, this might be a unique situation. Pennsylvania might, if Joe Biden, native son, had been running, I think things might have been very different for Democrats in this state. I'm not saying that's true for any other state, but this state is very sensitive to that issue. And the other thing is, Joe Biden, being a white, older white man, was really able to cut into Trump's, rural white county support here in Pennsylvania, which did not happen with Harris. Biden got like 2 to 4 points over Hillary Clinton's numbers in those counties because he appealed more to those older white rural male voters who, sorry, I'm very tired of hearing about, but nonetheless, this is how you win this state. So,
yep.
We saw the numbers look very much like Clinton's numbers. And then we also saw Harris trying to use Philadelphia as the kind of saving grace for Pennsylvania. And that's not how Pennsylvania has been won by people, who win the state, a statewide election.
And the turnout in Philadelphia was down from where it was in 2020.
Exactly. So there are, and I don't know, I mean, the stuff that Harris faced, the sexism, which I think was the biggest issue, and of course racism, but we had Barack Obama. So I think the biggest hurdle is being a woman, and that seems to be too much for many, many voters. So, Bob Casey lost by, I think it was like a little more than 16,000 votes. And if Joe Biden was top of the ticket, I don't think that would have happened. Or somebody else from Pennsylvania, like if Josh Shapiro had been the VP pick. And I know why.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I understand the arguments against him. I'm just saying, initially I thought, yeah, he's a really good pick because they need Pennsylvania and he would deliver Pennsylvania. He's very popular here with moderates.
I'm going to have to cut you off there again, Sarah, because we got to bring back our radio listeners. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and our guest, Sarah Jones from Politicus USA, right after this very quick break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm joined in this half hour by my good friend, Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Sarah, let me start you off with one of our favorite topics. And also, before I get to that, I want to remind our radio listeners that if they want to watch us, instead of just watch us and listen to us, instead of just listening to us, they can do that now at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, or at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, or on YouTube at youtube.com/@Brad Bannon. Okay, Sarah, let me get you started on one of our favorite topics. If you look at the media coverage of the 2024 campaign, the exit polls showed that less people pay attention to what are called the mainstream media, and they're paying more attention to podcasts. Hopefully, Deadline DC would be one of them, but Joe Rogan's podcast, all sorts of conservative podcasts, their influence is rising while the influence of the mainstream media is slowly dipping into the sunset. What can Democrats do about that?
Well, Democrats have been really, really, really crappy at this issue the entire time I've been covering politics, and I don't think they're going to do anything about it. What can the base do? What can people like you do? Like yes, your podcast is really important, and I think the left needs to focus on building out an infrastructure. The problem is that billionaires don't want to support the left, and the few wealthy sort of billionaires that there are that are liberals, they're supporting other things. They're not supporting media. The right-wing media is supported by the Russians. Of course, we know that, if you were getting paid, was it $500,000 a month or $1 million a month? You could probably crank out a lot more podcasts. Um, we don't have the finances for this stuff, but
by the way, just for the record, I haven't got any offers from Russians yet.
I don't know why, Brad. Boo. Yeah, I haven't either. And that's the other thing is as you brought up when we were talking about Hunter Biden, the left has they have principles that they're not willing to violate or to challenge, and I know that I have those principles myself. Part of the problem for the media on the left is that we are not willing to sell ourselves to the oil companies to get a sponsor. And so, there isn't the money. You get squeezed out by all these corporate people that are being funded by a lot of wealthy right-wing people and corporations. So I would say that the base has the power and has to take this power to start really giving support to media on the left that tells the truth. You don't want to be propagandized to or lied to, but they need to focus on, let's only pay attention to people who are centering democracy, who are centering labor, who are centering the right principles that this country, the best of this country, FDR sort of kind of principles. Why the left has become, Democrats have become so watered down. It just become such a big tent, which was great for a long time, very successful. Now not successful, huge tent, and what does it stand for? As you were talking about, I think people feel left behind. I think they feel, and I'm not talking about white rural voters when I say that. That's what the media is usually referring to. I'm talking about the people who are out there working, day and night and can barely pay their rent or their mortgage. And Joe Biden tried to help those people, and look what the media did to him. The media is not our friend. It's not here to help Democrats elect people who are going to do bad things to the media, like hold it accountable and make sure it pays all their taxes. That's not going to happen. People need to wake up and realize those people are not working for the values that you support. And you've got to put your energy and your resources and your support behind people who stand for what you stand for.
Okay, does that mean, well, let me ask you this question. Is all sorts of studies out showing how little attention that people pay to CNN, MSNBC, the news networks, except Fox, of course. Their ratings are going through the roof, and they'll go even higher once Trump is president.
Yeah.
How does the media have to adapt to the situation, and how can Democrats use the media to get ahead in life?
How the media is already trying to adapt, like they pre-adapted, right? They pre-conceded, they bent, kissed the ring and got down on their knees and kissed Trump's boots already before the election. So now they're already pivoting, like, oh, we need to do more right-wing stuff. And that's exactly why, they keep chasing after the right. The right already has their own infrastructure. They have their own ecosystem. they have one message and they get it across on all these podcasts that are very popular. They radicalize people. They have the money to radicalize people via algorithms that they can pay for or buy an entire, like X, they can just buy a social media. And Facebook, Zuckerberg's doing the same thing. They radicalize people and feed people to these various very right-wing, conspiratorial, non-informative, or even disinformation type outlets. I don't know how do you fight that on the left? If I had the answer to that, hope we would not even be in this situation, I would hope. I feel very discouraged by what the left is up against. And I think now, like, it's going back to, you talked in the pre-show, like, a little bit about, the Bush years. And I feel like this is going back to that sort of where you're all, you're on the underground. You're hanging out on Democratic underground. You're hanging out on like the places where you have to hide because you're talking about, like, I want people to be able to vote. Like, that's a big secret. I might not support this war. Like, that's a big secret. And I think that is where everything's going to go, because he's going to come after everyone who criticizes him, and people are going to be shut down, any media that criticizes him, or he'll have one of his rich people buy the media, probably try to buy CNN, try to buy the New York Times, as if the New York Times is critical of him. But that's where I think we can, because it's going to be, an oligarchy, and that's what they do. That's how they keep power. So the left has to keep doing, like, your podcast. We need more podcasts. We need more people doing YouTube. We need, like, free speech TV. We need all of, start everybody get their talents out there and start pushing discussions. And that's the thing. I was going to say talking points. The left doesn't do talking points. That's the problem. It's really hard to fight back against this, like, one narrative that the right has, when the left is everybody wants to bring their own ideas and have intellectual, like, honest intellectual debate, which is great. And I really respect that. But here we are.
Okay, well, let me ask you one question. We don't have much time left. But I read an article, I think it was in the New Yorker, about, it was written by a former reporter who worked as a canvasser for the Harris campaign in, I think it was Allentown, Pennsylvania. And, she said she started out with the Harris talking points, which was to tell voters about Project 2025 and how dangerous that was. And she tells the story of one voter she talked to, she went to her Project 225 people, and all the response she got from this voter, who was an uncommitted voter, was, why aren't you talking about why prices are so high? What's the answer to that voter?
Well, I mean, first of all, I live here in Pennsylvania, and a lot of people are pretending to be uncommitted and pretending to be independents, but they're actually Republicans. So I'm not sure that I'm fully buying that discussion. Not that she's not telling the truth, but that the voter might have, like, and also that was the talking point that the media was giving out. Why aren't Democrats talking about inflation?
Okay.
What do you say to somebody like that? How that goes back to the very issue that we have. Democrats are trying to solve all of these different problems. They're actually trying to implement policies to help people. You can't fight against Republicans who have, how many policies are they trying to push and discuss to help people?
Okay, Sarah, I'm going to have to interrupt you again because we're at the end of the show. I want to thank both my guests today, Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA, and also Mica Soellner, who is congressional reporter for Punchbowl News, and of course my intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi, who is truly a gentleman and a scholar. We'll be back with more Deadline DC, so watch for us Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, or the podcast anytime.